Thank you. I'd like to say something positive, something negative, and something positive. The positive is that this is happening. I said, I seem to have given so many talks in the last 2 days, I can't remember which one, but I said at the beginning of one of them, and I'll say it again, that we asked ourselves when we began the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, what would success look like? I think it looks like this. This is what success looks like. A gathering of committed people on a Saturday morning who are united by a concern with inequalities in health and social determinants of health. You are part of our social movement. We said we wanted to create a social movement, and you are an important part of that. And that's hugely encouraging. Last evening, I was personally honored that the rector of the university, the dean, other senior people came out to give me a doctorate honoris causa. And for those of you who were not there, what I said was that, yes, of course, it was personally exciting, but I took it as a recognition of the field of endeavor. And this is a sea change. They didn't, a generation ago, they used not to give honorary doctorates for people in public health. Deans of medical schools didn't acknowledge the importance of public health. This is a sea change. So yes, apart from the personal pleasure, it was something symbolically important. So I said the first thing I wanted to do was say something positive. And I feel enormously enthused and encouraged by the very existence of this gathering, but indeed the commitment of people. I hope that there is no truth to the myth that if you have your photo taken, you lose some part of your personal essence. Because if that were the case, there would be nothing of me left. But if that's some statement of a kind, then I appreciate that too. The second thing I want to say is negative. There are all sorts of problems in the world. We heard some of them elaborated about Panama, huge inequalities in income. People at the top, not just in Panama, but all over the place, find ways of avoiding tax. When Warren Buffett points out that his secretary has a higher rate of tax than he does, we know that there's something terribly wrong with the system and systems. All sorts of problems in the world. I alluded, as Bettina did, to Brexit, which to people like me, many people like me, was extremely hurtful. It represented to us the dishonesty of the politicians who are campaigning for it, represented something hurtful, and the people who voted for Brexit are casualties of globalization. You can see the correlation. In fact, there was something in this week's Economist looking at the areas of Britain that have been impacted by Chinese trade. There's a high correlation. The areas of Britain that have lost jobs and lost income because of Chinese trade were overwhelmingly the areas that voted for Brexit. They weren't voting to leave the European Union. They weren't voting for lack of cooperation. They were voting because they are casualties of globalization. And what I think we heard from you this morning is that Panama has this wonderful resource, the canal, and are the benefits of that resource being shared? No, they're not. not very well at all. We've heard about corruption. All sorts of problems in the world. Tony Atkinson, who you'll know, in his latest book on inequality, says that surveys of people in North America and Europe, when asked what the number one problem in the world is, they say inequality. This year's figures from Oxfam was that the top 62 billionaires in the world have the same wealth as the bottom half of the wealth distribution globally. 3.5 billion people have the same wealth as 62 billionaires. You could just about get those 62 billionaires in a London red double-decker bus. Not so the 3.5 billion who share the same wealth. There are enormous issues in the world. So we could go home depressed. Corruption, inequality, politicians who are dishonest, misleading in Europe, North America, and the like. But I'm not the least bit depressed, and that's the third thing that I want to say. I was doing an event for the BBC a while ago, and afterwards, having dinner afterwards, and the interviewer said, "You're a professional optimist, aren't you?" And I said, "Of course. Look, there's 194 member states of the World Health Organization. Suppose it were the case that 8 were taking us seriously on social determinants of health. I wouldn't go on the BBC and say there's 186 countries are ignoring us. I'd say we've got 8 enthusiasts. Next month we'll have 10. And 2 months after that we'll have 15. In fact, it's many more than 8. We've got countries all over the world taking this seriously. We've got communities where countries aren't doing it, communities aren't doing it, where governments are corrupt. We've got active civil society organizations. We're going to win this fight. We're going to win this struggle. And do you know why we're going to win this struggle? Because the angels are on our side. Because good always triumphs over evil. When we began the commission, on social determinants of health, I promised myself I would read Don Quixote in English translation. It seemed appropriate. A man wakes up one day and deludes himself that he's a medieval knight and runs round trying to do chivalrous deeds, and everybody's laughing at him. I thought that fitted me perfectly. I imagined I was a knight running around the world trying to change things, and I secretly suspected that everyone was laughing. And I told this to the Minister of Health in Spain, and he said, "But don't forget Sancho Panza." He said, "We need the idealism of Don Quixote, the dreamer, and we need the pragmatism of Sancho Panza." And I think, Bettina, thank you, you said it brilliantly, of what we need. I invite you to dream with me of a fairer world, but take the deeply practical steps that are necessary to achieve it. Thank you.